I am a doctor who can save any life, but at a great price. I have made a terrible mistake. This is my final testimony. I stand trial for medical malpractice, the breaking of my Hippocratic oath, and deception of the greatest degree. I am not tried in any earthly court, but one of my own making. I am both plaintiff and prosecutor. I am my own judge, jury, and executioner. I already know what my sentence will be. But before I carry it out, I must bear witness against myself. Was a doctor. Before today I was employed at V Hospital in C. I was chief of pediatric oncology. The beginning of my end occurred almost 10 years ago, on a cold November night. I had just been appointed to my position as an oncologist, and had undergone my first major tragedy. A 6-month-old infant passed away in my care, leukemia. In my field, the death of a patient is common. However, at this time, it was not yet common to me. This was the first child that had stopped breathing on my watch. Do you know what that's like? To watch a child suffer because its own body has turned traitor. To hear their labored and pained breathing. To smell the stench of decay in a living being as they fight against forces that have turned healthy marrow to poison and filled their blood with mutant offspring of an insidious creation. And you, watching it all, filled with knowledge and learning that brought us as a species off the face of the planet and into the stars, powerless to stop the natural march of the body as it runs itself into the disturbed dirt of an open grave. I am no man of religion, but I have seen the devil in the face of carcinoma. I took the loss of this child hard. My skin was thin, with none of the psychological protection my colleagues had accumulated over the years. Staring at the pale and still body of my patient, I remembered my own son, only a year old at the time. My heart leaked its grief to every extremity. Logic said I had done all I could, but this was a lie coated in sentiment. How could I practice medicine if I were to admit in the face of death that my skill was useless? I left the hospital while the baby's parents still grieved around the body. I walked the streets, trying to lose myself in the never-ending backgrounds of concrete and brick that constituted my city. Soon I was soaked through with ice-cold rain. My psyche dripped out in clumps through my clutching fingers. Even in my altered state, I knew I had gone too far into despair. I thought I would never return from it. But in a moment of unexpected clarity, I came back to myself. I wiped my cheeks of water and salt. I comprehended my surroundings. Unfamiliar buildings rose up on either side, swallowing me in their deep and angular shadows. I could no longer see the street. I supposed I was in an alley between alleys, a foreign place from my usual and well-trodden haunts. It was quiet here, soundless. As the seconds gathered, I realized I didn't remember how I had arrived there. I saw a figure at the end of a narrow passage. It was a man, and he was unremarkable in every aspect. His form blended into the building he leaned against, and he seemed only a smudge against the brick. His clothes were ragged, his face neither handsome nor excessively ugly. As I tried to place his features, they blurred, melting together like a liquid veil were being poured over my eyes. I did not want to approach him. If I had not been in such a state of distress, I would have left the moment I saw him, not sparing a second glance. But I allowed myself the indulgence of another look, and it was in the turning of my head that my damnation was sealed. The man stared back at me with coppery pupils. They reflected the meager light like a dog's eyes in the dark. Something within those orbs cut through my shirt and skin. It was as if my exterior were stripped away, and the darkest essence of my being were laid bare like a book. Somehow, I knew he read my shame with sympathy. I moved in his direction with slow feet. Once I was close enough to smell him, to hear his breathing above the patter of rain, I spoke. "Who are you?" The man did not answer. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a vial. Inside was a clear substance, slightly viscous like oil. He opened the cap and held his finger over its mouth. He produced a pin in his other hand and pricked the pad of his index finger. A drop of blood spilled over the edge of his fingerprint and into the vial, clouding the liquid in twisted and insinuative patterns. The man shook the mixture, and it congealed into the consistency of pus. He extended it to me. He cleared his throat. Raspy tongues of phlegm blasted away by the inner convulsions of his soft palate. It seemed his throat was more accustomed to smoke and smog than words. But after the cacophony, the words did come. "Anoint, and they will live." I stared at him. I had dismissed God as superstition years ago. Miracles at best were unknown principles of the natural world that still hid behind the curtain of ignorance. I was not a believing man, but in that alley, I allowed myself that weakness. Entertaining the ramblings of a wet homeless person who smelled of dog seemed harmless compared to the insanity that waited at the edge of my subconsciousness. With an empty mind and numb fingers, I reached out to take the vial, but before my fingertips could brush the glass surface, I stopped. How does it work? The man coughed again, a spluttering noise like a dying car. "A price is paid." "A price, what?" He met my gaze with his coppery stare, one befitting. My eyes went back to the vial. Years from that moment, lying alone in the gloom of a dark bedroom, I would lie to myself and say I did not know what he meant, that I could not have known. But I did. I knew then, and I know now, that there is only one thing worthy of the priceless gift of life. The rain smacked the ground around us like 1,000 heartbeats. I remembered the flatline of the infant that had died only hours earlier. The sustained wail of the machine reverberated in my skull like a recited prayer. After a moment, I took the vial, cradling it loosely in my fingers. The man's voice became soft. Tell no one, or the debt will fall to you. Not everyone understands the price of miracles. Without a backwards glance, the man turned. He walked down the alley, then vanished around the corner. I stayed still. The rain cooled my fevered skin. I wiped my hand over my face. Something shifted, and in another moment, I was on a familiar street, walking back towards the hospital. I thought I had been subject to a hallucination, a physical manifestation of my mania, but I felt the unblemished glass of the vial in my pocket, and my heart was torn apart with a strange opposition of dread and longing. It was weeks before I used my new gift. There was another child, this one 4 years old. The cancer had gotten into her bones. At night she woke the entire ward with her screams of pain. We subjected her to surgery, chemo, radiation. We filled her body with poison until it was pressed against the threshold of death. Still, the tumors rose up again one after the other like depraved parodies of Christ. She was nearing the end. It was time to tell the family to say their goodbyes. But before I did, on the last evening of her treatment, I went to see her. I was there making sure that she had received her regular dose of morphine. I saw her small and drawn face. Her bald head was dotted with sweat like dew. Her body, shuddering, draped across the bedspread, was sorrow incarnate. I remembered the vial. I wish I could confess that I fought to convince myself, that I had to go over some ethical grocery list before I took the vial out of my pocket, but there was no moral struggle. Her face, her pallid and bruised and starving form, with collarbones jutting out from her skin like axe blades, such an image was an all-consuming counter-argument. I took the vial and unstopped it. The room filled with a cloying smell, like berries rotting in milk. I spilled one drop of its substance onto her forehead. The fluid sank into her skin like a gas. Her face relaxed. For the first time in 2 years, she slept without the aid of opiates. The next day she woke with bright eyes and greeted her parents by leaping from the bed and running to embrace them. They wept at the miracle, confused, terrified, but altogether grateful. They celebrated. As I watched the scene of joy, I contemplated other things. I pondered how in another room of the hospital that night, an old man had died suddenly of heart failure. I read the report myself. He had no family record of heart problems, no such previous issues in his history. He has been admitted for forgetting to take his diabetes medication and having a higher than average blood sugar. They were keeping him overnight strictly as a precaution, nothing more. He was 60, pushing 70. He had a wife and 5 children. In the same minute, perhaps the same second I had poured out the vial on the child, his heart had ceased beating. What would you have done? How was I supposed to reconcile the image of the young child, whole and healthy, with the image of a circle of siblings mourning their father as his casket was lowered into the ground? I attended the funeral from a distance. I told myself it was penance, but now I worry it was reassurance. I left that bleak gathering with resolve, not regret. I told myself that the old man probably would have lived for only another decade. 10 old years, exchanged for a lifetime of health. This was fair. Slowly, I found myself making more nightly visits to the sick children in our unit. I went to those near death, those who had not responded to treatment, those who grimaced in sleep with the pain of growths consuming their insides and pushing against their internal organs. Their recoveries were explained by the hospital as unexpected turnarounds, attributed to some latent effect of a new experimental treatment, or a thing equally esoteric. It is strange how we humans will explain away miracles, as if the thought of cosmic intervention is somehow more terrifying. I am ashamed to say I reaped the benefits of my healings. I accepted one promotion after another, telling myself it was for the greater good. I would donate my extra salary secretly to charitable causes, but it was an empty gesture. I should have stopped, refused. But it was not long until the entire unit was under my purview, and as the number of my patients increased, so did the bodies in my wake. I kept track of the names of my victims at first. I remembered their faces, their histories. As the list mounted, the weight became too much. I turned a blind eye to them. I let their identities slip from my thoughts. Most serial killers keep trophies. My only remembrances were empty spots in my memory, deliberately kept bare. Unexplained deaths accumulated in the hospital, never enough to prompt investigation, but enough to inspire superstition. I saw nurses start wearing prayer beads, and doctors refuse non-essential patients based on nothing but a bad feeling. I could not see it, the carnage I wrought. All I could see were the faces of the children who now lived and breathed free of sickness and torture. When I could not sleep for guilt, it was their faces that allowed me to rest. Yes, the children lived, but I was still a murderer. It is strange how life moves on, even in the presence of evil. In the shadow of the hospital, my family grew. I watched my son mature, and my wife and I welcomed another boy into the world. I loved my children equally, but the complicated reality remains that even the best parents have favorites. My older son was mine. He shared my intellect, my interest in medicine. At first it manifested in a simple curiosity of my stethoscope. It grew into him reading medical textbooks the moment he could sound out words. It was all unintelligible to him. I'm sure he only looked at them for the pictures, but nothing gave me more pride than to watch him turn the thin pages, a look of concentration on his young face, still lined with baby fat. He was 10 when he collapsed for the first time. It was my other son that found him. He was only 4. He came to me, his face red with effort and tears already soaking his shirt at the throat. He was the quieter of the two, but I still remember his wails as he begged me to come downstairs. He fell. He clutched on my leg, the reverberations of his sounded fear echoing in my bones. I pushed him off and ran down the stairs. My feet stumbled and I almost broke my neck in a tumble. I righted myself and went searching for my son. I found him on the living room floor. He was face down on the carpet, his arms twisted. He wasn't moving. I ran to him and checked his pulse. It was there faintly, but he wouldn't wake. Blood leaked from his nose, smashed in by his fall. I fumbled with my phone and called an ambulance. In the background, his brother continued to howl, begging him to open his eyes, to be okay. The doctors didn't know what caused it. After we arrived at the hospital, and after every test had been performed, all my colleagues could do was shrug their shoulders. They managed to rouse my son from his unconsciousness, but he was lethargic and weak. After a month of observation and experimentation, all they could tell us was that his blood was failing. The red cells were tearing apart at the seams, keeping oxygen from getting to his brain. They didn't know what to do. We went from hospital to hospital. We tried every experimental treatment known to man. His younger brother donated blood, plasma, and even marrow once we found him to be a good genetic match. His generosity was in vain. It all was. Nothing worked. My son was dying, and there was nothing I could do about it. And it was in that hopelessness that I thought of the vial again. I had refused the thought before. I would not corrupt my family with its use. But that little vial grew heavier by the day in my pocket. I held on to hope in the medical system, gripping to it so tight until it felt like my fingernails were coming off at the quick. Each time my hand brushed the container's glass surface in my pocket, I felt the notion of some great evil hanging over my head, suspended by a single thread. No, I would not toy with the idea of cutting that string. I would see my son made well, but I would not resort to murder to do so. But after a doctor, the last we would see, instructed us to bring our son home, giving us nothing but a prescription for a bottle of liquid morphine, my convictions shattered. Do you see, they were leaving my son to die. Do you see that I had no other choice? Do you understand? That night I crept into his room while he slept. In the dark I heard thrashing. His brother, who slept above him in the bunk my wife and I had built years before, had experienced night terrors ever since he had seen his brother collapse. I heard his whimpers and they festered in my ears. If I had any questions regarding what I was about to do, they were wiped away in an instant. The sounds that came from my little boy echoed my pain. It all needed to end. I stood over my sleeping older son, his face contorted in half-realized pain. It had been hours since his last spoonful of drug. I dug the vial out of my pocket. Somehow, after all my use, a small portion remained. I unstopped it, then held it above his head. I allowed a drop to fall. The liquid descended and splashed on his forehead. Then it was gone. My son went from pain to peace in a moment. His face relaxed, his shoulders loosened. For the first time in a year, I saw him pass to untroubled sleep, breathing deeply. I sat down at his desk chair. I watched him rest for a long while. For a small moment, I felt relieved. But in the sounds of my older son's untroubled breathing, I heard something else. Silence. My younger son no longer thrashed in his bunk. I stood and went to him. He was so still. I touched him and he was cold. I reached for his neck, grasping for his pulse. I pressed deep into the soft flesh, but there was no beating underneath my fingertips. I cannot remember the hours that followed. For those, I must rely on the account of others. My son told me he woke to me screaming, the sound somewhere between the void of death and the inferno of agony. He thought I was dying. My wife had been dealing with medical bills in the kitchen. She heard my pain as well. She told me she rushed into our boys' room, and saw me cradling the lifeless body of our youngest, begging for him to wake up. Paramedics arrived and declared him dead at the scene. The autopsy revealed it was a freak brain aneurysm. The funeral came and went. It was only at the reception, when I was shaking limp hands and hearing whispered condolences, that my mind began to point the finger of blame. The investigation was short, with only one true suspect. The full implication of my actions were upon me, and I wanted nothing more than to hear a pronouncement of punishment. And because no earthly court will give me my just dues, I have taken this duty upon myself. I have destroyed the vial. I expected something so powerful to put up more of a fight. Instead, all it took was a hammer. I poured the liquid and glass into a trash fire in an alley. Perhaps it was the same alley where I met the man, though I cannot say for sure. Watching it burn, I feared that I would press my hand against my pocket and feel its oblong shape, whole once again. But the cloth remained smooth and the space empty. I will be dead soon. The doctors will claim an unexpected thrombosis or embolism, a small twitch of muscle or leak of blood that will put a stop to my beating heart. But in truth, it is my honesty that will have killed me. The man in the alley warned me that if I confessed, I would pay the same price as my victims. He was telling the truth about the vial. I can only hope he was honest about this too. Thank you, dear reader, for your help. In your curiosity, you have seen justice done. In receiving my confession, you have allowed the axe to fall. Do not let it weigh on your soul. I am guilty. You have done the world a service. To my son, if you find this, I am sorry. I am sorry for what I have held you party to. This is not your fault. My soul is stained, trading your brother's life for your own, but your soul is whole. Remember this, I beg of you. Please do not follow me to where I go. I don't know what awaits me, but I know there will be no forgiveness. I do not seek for it. I will pay my debt. And that will be enough.